You're listening to Over the Oxer podcast with Tracy Cole for all things to do with the mind for equestrians. Welcome to boot camp number 3. How have you been getting on with the tasks I've given you so far? How have you been getting on with thinking about how you talk to yourself, whether you complain inside your head? How have you been getting on with how you describe yourself as a rider inside your head and to other people? What about those tiny incremental steps that we talked about last time? Have you taken any decisive, concrete action? Have you set up a daily, tiny habit that you can do easily that will bring you to the point where you're starting to feel better about your riding and yourself as a rider? Well, today we're going to talk about what happens when you plateau. If you plateau, of course. So how to avoid a plateau. So sometimes we get to that level. We get to where we want to be, or maybe we get to a stepping stone level. And even if we're on our way to a goal, we stop. We go into this kind of a rest, if you like, or this hibernation. We think, we'll pause here. This is a good time to pause. But the problem is often we don't get going again. And in fact, sometimes when we get to a certain point, whether it's the full goal or a stepping stone point, we lose some motivation. In fact, it's almost the action of getting to that point demotivates us. So, for example, it's having the confidence to maintain that level or exceed it. And that becomes a point of a lack of confidence. It can become nerve-wracking. It can make us feel very unsteady. And so how can we prevent this? Now, again, it is all in those small, consistent actions. And from this point onwards, when we reach this certain plateau point, it can become easier said than done. So what is it? What's the missing thing that we need to inject before we ever get to a plateau? And that thing is resilience. Emotional resilience very often. And how can we cultivate that resilience so that we keep on going? It's not that we grit our teeth and we kind of just bulldozer our way through, but that we can shrug off the negativities that come with riding, the small steps that we thought were going to work and they're not working. It's that ability to dust ourselves off and keep going. So cultivating that resilience, one of its foundational core aspects is self-trust. And it's not always about trusting yourself to being correct and right 100% of the time. It's about trusting yourself to believe in yourself, to believe that you can handle whatever gets thrown at you. So knowing that you can handle it, having that level of self-trust. And if you just try that on for a few moments, imagine now that you are able to deal with whatever comes your way. Just imagine it. Just take a few moments in silence to imagine, I can do it. I can handle what comes my way, the ups and downs, the ins and outs. I can handle it. And it feels good, doesn't it? That self-trust, it feels really nice. However it felt inside your body, wherever it was inside your body, take a moment to think about that now, because you can always go back to that and reinforce it. But how can we build self-trust in a more practical way? Well, as we know, it's built over time. It's not an instantaneous thing. You don't suddenly just believe in yourself. But as we know, if it builds up resilience, which builds motivation, enables us to sustain these consistent actions that we've been talking about, then it's really worth it. So I have a little analogy for you to think about, first of all, before I give you an exercise to do. Brené Brown, who you may have heard of, is a psychology professor at the University of Houston. And she has this analogy, and she uses it with couples for relationship trust. But I think we can just about tailor it to what we're talking about here. And originally, this trust was seen as a jar of marbles. So each time one person in the couple did something that was trustworthy, they imagined putting a marble into a jar. And each time there was a bit of mistrust, they took a marble out. So they had a very visual representation of where the trust was in that relationship. Now, if we tailor that towards what we're doing and we just think about having that jar and we think about how we can start to fill that jar with our own marbles, and we start filling, and we can start filling by these small actions. But to trust yourself and your ability, even with that analogy, needs just a little bit more work than that even. One of the biggest things is to detach yourself from an expectation you have on yourself. So, for example, do you believe that you should be able to do something? Or at the end of a riding session or a groundwork session, or however you're working with your horse, you think to yourself, well, I should have been able to do that. Or we should have been able to do it. Or my horse should have been able to do it. And that just about takes out every marble we've got in our marble jar. So being able to detach from this expectation, although difficult, is really necessary. Being able to think, this is what I'd like. This is my ideal situation. But am I okay to achieve something far less, even if it's just that my horse got a bit of exercise, or that we started to do a bit more bonding with each other or something like that? And it may be a far cry from where you actually want to be, but detaching yourself from the expectation is so liberating and increases that level of self-trust and resilience. So another question to ask yourself about self-trust and where you're happy is, do you beat yourself up if that plan goes astray? Can you only be happy about a ride if it's successful? And by successful, I mean by your own measure. Is that an unrealistic measure? What are you okay in achieving is quite a good question to ask before you go out with your horse. What am I okay with? What would it be nice to achieve? But what am I okay with? And allow your own personal brain programming to keep moving forwards by putting the high level expectation on the back burner. And remember to finish your session with something really fun. And this could be anything at all. This could be getting off your horse and just doing a little bit of groundwork together, just playing, just having a game. I used to have one of those big horse balls, like the Swiss balls. And I had a horse that used to really love kicking that Swiss ball. Well, it wasn't a Swiss ball, it was a proper toughened horse ball, but really loved that. And that used to make me smile because it looked so crazy, a horse dribbling a ball. But that was really fun. And maybe you can think of something that's equally fun for you. Maybe it's just plaiting, plaiting the tail, plaiting the mane, or giving your horse a really good groom. What would end the session on a high, even if none of the goals had been attained? So remember your marble jar. Remember that it empties each time that we end on a negative note. And it fills each time we do something fun or we celebrate And we celebrate the small wins and the big ones and the teeniest, tiniest ones. We celebrate them all. We put another marble into that jar. And over time, with consistency, that trust jar fills, and that self-trust becomes self-belief, becomes resilience, and riding just starts to be something even easier than it is now. My next boot camp is all about feeling a little bit more confident, a little bit more balanced in your mind, seeing things for how they really are rather than projecting an anxiety and thinking about the what ifs. I'll see you again really soon. Take care. Bye for now.